She was 20 years old, and she was broke in the way that has a specific texture to it, not the temporary broke of a bad month, not the recoverable broke of a missed paycheck, but the kind that settles in and makes itself at home. The kind where you check your balance and the number is already the number you knew it would be, and that knowing doesn't make it better. No apartment, no car that started reliably, no one whose phone she could call without the call costing her something she couldn't afford to spend. Just a denim jacket with a fraying cuff, a tote bag she'd been using since high school, and a $10 bill she had kept in the small interior pocket of that jacket through 2 moves and 1 winter. Not for any particular reason except that keeping it there had felt, in the particular logic of hard times, like evidence that she was not completely out of options. And with that $10, Aldous bought a telegraph office that had been sitting dark and locked on the main street of a town called Calder, Oregon, since 1971, a building that hadn't sent a message in 53 years, that the town had been trying to give away for the better part of a decade, without finding anyone willing to take it. The people of Calder said the old Morse building was past saving, that Wren was throwing good money after bad, and they would have been right about the money part if she'd had any good money, which she didn't. But what none of them knew, and what there was no particular reason for anyone to know, was that inside the wire room at the back of the building, the small room where the operators had once sat at their instruments sending words across hundreds of miles of copper wire, behind a section of paneling that had been nailed shut when the office closed and painted over twice since, was something a man named August Morse had been building in careful, private silence for the last 18 years of his life. Something that would change Wren's life from the ground up, and leave the people who had doubted her, who had looked at her and seen, without meaning to be cruel, a young woman with no real claim to anything, standing with nothing useful left to say. If this kind of story finds something in you, a story about what you can build when everyone has decided you can't, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. And in the comments, tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. We read every one. Wren Aldous had grown up in a town called Millhaven in the Willamette Valley, in a house with a peeling porch railing that her father had been meaning to fix for as long as she could remember. Her father, Gene Aldous, managed a farm supply warehouse on the edge of town and had a talent for explaining why things couldn't be done that was more reliable than his talent for doing them. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had settled, sometime in his mid-30s, into a permanent expectation of difficulty, and he had built his life around accommodating that expectation in ways he'd come to call being realistic. Her mother, Sharon, worked at the county assessor's office and was the practical engine of the household. She paid the bills, scheduled the appointments, kept the porch railing from getting worse if not from getting better. She was careful and capable, and had the specific tiredness of a person who has been carrying the operational weight of a family for so long that the weight has stopped feeling optional. Wren was the middle of 3 children. Her older brother, Marcus, had gone to work at the warehouse with their father at 19 and had seemed from the outside to arrive at the same accommodation their father had arrived at, quietly and without protest. Her younger sister, Blythe, was still in high school when Wren left and was already, even at 15, the clearest-eyed person in the family. The one who said what was true in the particular flat tone of someone who has not yet learned that honesty needs managing. Wren had been good at school in a way that nobody had known what to do with. Not good at the parts of school that got noticed. She was not a joiner, not a performer, not someone who raised her hand, but good at the parts that happened quietly, in the back of the classroom, in the library, in the work itself. She read everything. She wrote with a precision that her English teacher, a woman named Mrs. Calloway, had once described in a report card comment as unusual for her age, which Wren had kept. She had the kind of mind that liked finding the thread that ran through things, the underlying logic, the pattern that explained the scatter. She had wanted to study literature. She'd been accepted to a small college in Eugene with a partial scholarship, and she had sat with the acceptance letter on the porch in Millhaven for an evening and worked the math. The partial scholarship covered less than half. The gap was not closable without loans that would take a decade to repay on any salary a literature degree was likely to produce in Millhaven or near it. She had folded the letter and put it in the drawer of her desk and gotten a job at a print shop in town. The print shop was owned by a man named Dale Brixton, who was 56 and had been running it for 20 years with the steady, modest competence of someone who has found his right-sized thing and is not looking for more. He taught Wren to set type, to operate the flatbed press, to read a proof the way it needed to be read, not for what you expected to see, but for what was actually there. She was good at it. She worked there for 2 years, saving in the careful incremental way that saving works when the numbers are small. She had almost enough for a first semester's fees when Dale's son came back from Portland and needed the job. Dale told her on a Friday afternoon, with the particular discomfort of a fair man doing an unfair thing. He gave her 2 weeks' notice and a good reference. She thanked him. She drove home and sat in her car in the driveway for a while before going inside, not because she was too sad to go in, but because she wanted to know what she was going to say before she said it, which was a habit of hers. Gene Aldous, at dinner that evening, said she could come back and work at the warehouse. He said it the way he said most things, with the implication that the realistic option was already self-evident, and he was only naming it as a courtesy. She thanked him. She looked at her plate. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the warehouse was a place to stop rather than a place to go, and that she did not yet know where she was going, but she knew that stopping was not it. She spent the money she'd saved to move to Portland. She thought there would be more there, more print shops, more options, more of the particular density of city that makes finding work easier by making the search area larger. She was right about some of it. She found a room in a shared house in northeast Portland, with 4 other people and a kitchen whose cleanliness was managed by consensus, which is to say imperfectly. She found a job within 3 weeks at a small design firm that needed someone who could operate a press, and she worked there for 9 months until the firm lost its lease and consolidated to a digital-only operation that didn't need a press operator. She found another job. She lost it when the company was acquired. She found a third and kept it for 7 months, and then the hours were cut, and the math stopped working, and the room in the shared house, which had been just affordable, became just not. She moved out in October. She stayed with a friend named Sasha for 2 weeks, and Sasha was generous and sorry about the limitation of her generosity, which are 2 things that can both be true. She stayed 2 nights at a shelter that was full and loud in a way that made sleep difficult. She had $43 and the 10 she was keeping in the jacket pocket, and she had a phone whose bill she had paid through November. She was 20 years old. It was Sasha who found the listing. They were sitting in Sasha's kitchen on a Wednesday morning, and Sasha had her laptop open, searching property listings the way people search things when they want to be helpful and don't know what form the help should take. There was a listing on a county surplus site, a page that looked like it hadn't been updated since approximately the early internet, for a commercial property in Calder, Josephine County, Oregon, former Telegraph office, assessed at $12,000. Current asking price for county transfer, $10. Wren looked at the screen. Calder's small, Sasha said, with the care of someone preempting an objection. How small? Population 412. Sasha read further. Former railroad junction. The railroad moved the junction in 1962. The telegraph office closed in 1971. Wren looked at the listing photo. The building was a single-story wood frame structure with a false front in the Western commercial tradition, the kind that makes a one-story building look like it's trying to be 2 stories. The paint was gray in the way that paint gets when what it's doing is no longer quite painting. The windows were intact. The windows are intact, she said. Sasha looked at her. That's what you took from that. The windows are the first thing, Wren said. She was at the Josephine County offices the next morning. She had taken a bus and then hitched a 12-mile stretch with a man delivering fencing supplies who was entirely uninterested in conversation, which suited her. The clerk at the county property office was a woman in her 50s named Harriet, who had the steady, slightly weary efficiency of someone who has handled too much paperwork to be surprised by any particular piece of it. She found the Morse building file, which was thick in the way that files get thick when a property has been listed and relisted without resolution, and spread the relevant papers on the counter. The building was 8,100 square feet. Built in 1894, the main room had been the public office, the counter, the waiting area, the operator's window. Behind it was a smaller room, maybe 200 square feet, where the actual telegraph instruments had been housed, what the original building plans labeled the wire room. Behind that, a storage room. The electrical had been updated in 1958 and not touched since, which Harriet described in the careful, neutral voice of someone delivering information without editorial comment. The roof had been repaired in 1987, and, based on available documentation, not since. Wren asked what the $10 got her. Harriet looked at her over her reading glasses. Clear title and a building permit waiver for the first year of renovation. Any liens? None. Restrictions on use? Harriet checked the file. It's on the State Historic Register. Exterior can't be substantially altered without approval. Interior is your business. Wren put the $10 bill on the counter. It came out of the jacket pocket still folded in quarters. Harriet looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone who has made a private peace with the variety of the world. She stamped the transfer form. "Welcome to Calder," she said. Wren caught a ride to Calder that afternoon in a produce delivery truck going within 2 miles of town. She walked the remaining quarter-mile with her tote bag and stood in front of the Morse building in the afternoon light. It was worse than the photo, and better than she'd prepared herself for. The false front was sound, the framing behind it visible where a piece of facing board had come away, and the framing looked dry and true. The windows were intact, all 6 of them, original glass in the wavy, slightly bluish style of windows made before glassmaking became precise, which was something she had learned to recognize at the print shop. The door opened with the key Harriet had given her, into a room that smelled of dust and old wood and the dry, specific scent of old paper, documents and envelopes and the residue of things written down. The main room had a long wooden counter along the back wall with the operator's window still framed in its dark oak surround. The floor was wide plank Douglas fir, scarred with a century of use but solid underfoot, no flecks, no soft spots. There were empty wooden cubbyholes on the wall behind the counter where telegram forms had once been stored. On a hook beside the window, a faded cardboard sign, "Hours of operation, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily," and beneath it, smaller, "Messages transmitted within the hour." She stood at the counter for a while. The wire room door was at the back left of the main space. It stuck when she pushed it, then gave. The room inside was 8 feet by 12, darker than the main room, with a single window set high in the north wall that had been painted over on the outside. There was a workbench along one wall, original to the building by the look of it, and above it a section of wall that was noticeably different from the rest, the paint slightly thicker, the edges more defined, the way a wall looks when something has been done to it rather than just painted over time. She pressed on it. Solid, she looked at the edges. The gap between the panel section and the surrounding wall was clean and consistent, cut, not natural. Someone had nailed this section shut from the look of the fastener pattern along the top and painted over it. She filed it away and examined the rest of the building and came back and looked at the panel again. She was not going to open it tonight. She had no tools, only her phone for light, and the important things deserved better conditions. She would sleep on the counter in the main room, and in the morning she would find out what Calder had that served as a hardware store, and she would ask the questions that needed asking. The town, in the morning, had a feed and farm supply at one end of Main Street, and a combination gas station and general store at the other, and between them a diner called Patsy's and a post office the size of a garden shed. The general store had a limited but non-zero selection of hand tools, from which she bought a pry bar, a hammer, and a box of screws, paying 31 of her remaining $43. She bought coffee at Patsy's for $2 and stood at the counter. The woman behind the counter was named Dell, not Patsy. Patsy had been her mother, and the diner had been her mother's, inherited in 2004, along with a building in need of a new exhaust hood and strong opinions from the regulars about the soup. She was 62, broad-built, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the manner of someone who has served coffee to every variation of person who passes through a small town and has formed, on balance, a positive view of them. "You bought the Morse building," she said. Not a question. "Yesterday," Wren said. "Harriet called," Dell said, which closed the information loop entirely. Dell told her about August Morse over a refilled coffee. He had been the last telegraph operator in Calder, not a relative of Samuel Morse. He had been at pains to clarify to everyone the name was coincidence, which was either spectacularly apt or spectacularly ironic, depending on who you asked. He had run the office alone from 1958 until it closed in 1971. After the closure, he had stayed in Calder, because he was 63 by then, and Calder was his place, and he was not the kind of man to leave a place simply because its central purpose had ended. He had lived in the apartment above the old hardware store and had spent the years after the office closed doing something that nobody in Calder had been entirely clear on. He went in there every day, Dell said, meaning the Morse building. Morning, sometimes afternoon. Had a key the whole time, the county never asked for it back. He'd be in there an hour, sometimes 2. Never said what he was doing. Wren thought about the wire room. The paneled wall. Did anyone ask him? Hector Baines asked him once. August told him he was keeping the instruments calibrated. Dell paused. The instruments had been gone since 1971. He had died in 1989, Dell said, at 81, of a winter pneumonia that moved faster than expected. No family, no will that anyone had found. The county had taken the building and had been listing it since. Wren asked about the paneled section in the wire room. Dell looked at her steadily. You saw it. I did. August put that up in. Must have been 72. 73 at the latest. Roy Pemberton ran the hardware store then, sold August the lumber. Said August was particular about the dimensions. She turned her coffee mug a quarter turn, a thinking habit. Nobody's been in that room since August died, far as I know. County boarded the building. But the wire room was already closed, Wren said. Already closed, Dell agreed. Wren paid for the coffees. Dell waved off the money and Wren put it on the counter anyway, because she had decided in some general way that this was what you did when a person gave you something that cost them time. She walked back to the Morse building. The wire room in morning light was better than it had been in the dark. She examined the paneled section carefully before she touched it, approximately 4 feet wide by 3 feet tall, set into the wall behind the workbench at about chest height, fastened with cut nails at 8 points along the perimeter. She worked the pry bar in at the top left corner and felt the first nail give, and then the second, and she worked her way around the perimeter, the way Mrs. Calloway had told her to read a proof, systematically, without skipping, trusting the process more than her impatience. The panel came free cleanly, as if it had been waiting to. Behind it was a recess in the wall, framed in the same wood as the building. Inside, a metal document box with a clasp but no lock, a smaller wooden box, hand-built, with a sliding lid worn smooth, and an envelope set on top of both. in a hand so precise it looked typeset. On the envelope, for the next operator. She sat on the workbench and held the envelope for a moment before opening it. August Morse had been a telegrapher for 37 years. He had started as a messenger boy at 15 in 1923 and worked his way up through the relay stations and junction offices of the Western Union network until he landed in Calder in 1958, which he described as the last posting and the best one, because Calder was a town that knew what it was and didn't pretend otherwise, which he had found, after years of larger places, to be a significant relief. When the telegram died, that was how he put it. Not the office closed, but the telegram died, which Wren found precise and right. He had understood that he was not going to adapt easily to a world that communicated quickly, and without the considered weight of a message you paid by the word to send. He did not think the new way was wrong. He thought it was different in ways that involved some loss, and he thought that being accurate about loss was important, even when accuracy didn't change anything. He had spent the 18 years of his retirement doing what the letter described as his real work. He had written down what he knew. Not autobiography. He was clear about this distinction. He had written down the practice of telegraphy, the codes, the rhythms, the reading of signals through noise, the art of sending a clear message under difficult conditions. He had written the history of the instrument and the network and the people who had operated it. He had written down the culture of the wire room, the community of operators who had communicated across hundreds of miles through the language of long and short pulses, who had known each other by their fists, which was the term for the individual style of a telegrapher's hand on the key, as distinctive as a signature. He had written it all down because he believed that things that were ending deserved to be documented with the same care that things at their beginning deserved to be built, and because writing it down was the work available to him, and he had never in his life been comfortable not working. He had also saved money. He wrote about this with the plainness of someone reporting a fact rather than making a point. He had lived simply in the apartment above the old hardware store and had not spent on things that were not necessary, and had invested what he could in instruments he understood well enough to be patient with. Bonds, savings accounts, the occasional CD at the credit union in Grants Pass. He had not accumulated a great sum. He had not expected to. What he had accumulated, over 50 years of working and saving in the patient, unhurried way available to people who do not spend money on the appearance of having it, was enough to be useful to someone. He had tried to arrange its legal transfer, but had found the process, without family to anchor it, resistant in ways he lacked the energy to overcome. So he had put it in the box and put the box in the wall and trusted that the right person would come along. He closed by saying that the operator's key in the wooden box was the one he had used for the last 11 years of his career in Calder, and that he hoped whoever found it understood that an instrument made to send messages across distance is a good thing to own, regardless of whether there is still a wire to send them on. He hoped it was someone who understood what it meant to work carefully in a small room doing something most people didn't see. Wren sat on the workbench in the wire room for a long time. She opened the wooden box first. The telegraph key was inside, brass, mounted on a butternut base worn dark with decades of use. The lever polished smooth on top, where a thumb and 2 fingers had rested for 11 years. She lifted it out and held it in both hands. It was heavier than she expected. She pressed the lever once, gently, and it clicked with a clean precision that said something about the quality of the thing and the condition it had been kept in. She set it down and opened the document box. The manuscript was inside, not one document but many, organized in labeled folders in August's hand. Dated across 18 years, 1972 through 1989. The top folder was labeled simply, "What the Wire Was." She opened it and read the first page. By the 3rd paragraph, she understood she was reading something written with the care of someone who had spent a career doing a thing and knew that doing and explaining were different skills, and had worked to be good at both. Beneath the manuscript folders was a smaller envelope. It held a passbook from the Josephine County Credit Union, last updated December 1988, and 2 sheets listing bonds by series and amount. She worked through the numbers once, then again, then a third time, because the first 2 times she had not trusted herself to be reading them correctly. $68,000. Bonds and a savings account. In the name of August Gideon Morse. She held the passbook and looked at it and looked at the operator's key on the workbench beside her and listened to Calder, which was, at 10 in the morning, very quiet, a vehicle on the road outside, a bird near the painted window, the old building settling into itself the way old buildings do. She went to Patsy's and told Dell. She brought the letter and read portions of it aloud, not the financial portions, but the parts about the work and the wire and the community of operators who knew each other by their fists. Dell listened with her arms on the counter and her coffee going cold. When Wren finished, Dell was quiet for a moment. He was in there every morning for 18 years, Dell said. And nobody knew. He was writing it all down, Wren said. Dell looked at the wall of photographs behind Wren Calder at various points in its history, the railroad junction before 1962, a photograph of the telegraph office in what looked like the 40s, a man in a white shirt in the doorway who might have been anyone. He brought pie in here on the first Friday of the month, Dell said. My mother's diner, before it was mine. Whatever kind he'd made that week. He baked. Not many men his generation baked. She paused. He said he'd learned from necessity, same as everything. Did he say why the first Friday? Wren asked. Dell smiled for the first time. He said it was important to make a habit of the good things before you needed them to be a habit. Wren thought about that for the rest of the day. She went to the Josephine County Credit Union in Grants Pass the next morning. The manager's name was Robert Hale, and he had a specific kind of institutional patience that Wren found, after the last several months, remarkably calming. He verified the passbook and the bonds with the thoroughness of someone who has learned that thoroughness is its own protection, made calls over the course of the afternoon, and told Wren by the end of it that there were processes to complete, but no reason to expect anything other than a clean resolution. August Morse was a member here for 40 years, Robert said. He came in every December to update his passbook in person. He looked at the passbook on the desk. He told me once he was saving it for someone who needed it. I thought he meant a relative. He meant whoever came next. Wren said. The work on the building took most of the spring and part of the summer. She did what she could herself. The floor she refinished on her knees over 4 days, which she would remember as among the most physically difficult things she'd done, and which produced a result she stood in the doorway and looked at for a long time when it was done. The roof wanted new sheeting on the south slope. She hired a roofer from Grants Pass and watched carefully enough to understand it. The electrical she did not attempt herself. A contractor from Medford spent 2 weeks on it and remarked, 3 separate times, that the 1958 work had been good work for its era. She found a man in Medford named Cesar Quintero who restored antique communications equipment. She brought him the operator's key in its wooden box. He held it under his lamp and told her it was a J.H. Bunnell & Co. double-speed key, circa 1940, and that whoever had maintained it had known exactly what they were doing. He asked if she wanted to sell it. She did not. She placed it on the workbench in the wire room, in the center, on the worn butternut base, and left it there because that was where it belonged. The manuscript she spent evenings with through April and May, reading it in order in the main room by lamplight. It was extraordinary in the way things are extraordinary when someone has spent enough time on them. Not polished, August Morse was a telegrapher, not a writer, and his sentences had the slightly formal, slightly compressed quality of a man who had communicated for decades in a medium that charged by the word, but it was complete and specific and true, And those three things together produced something she found herself reading, not as research, but as company. The company of someone who had worked carefully in a small room doing something most people didn't see, who had understood that the work mattered whether or not it was witnessed. She contacted a librarian at the University of Oregon named Patricia Yee, who studied communications history and described the manuscript. Patricia drove down from Eugene on a Saturday, sat in the main room with the folders open on the counter, and read for 4 hours without a break. When she looked up, she said that to her knowledge this was the most comprehensive practitioner account of small station telegraphy in the Pacific Northwest that existed, and that she would like to discuss options for preservation and possible publication. They were still discussing it in June when Calder had its first warm weekend of the year, and Dell opened Patsy's windows for the season. Wren brought a pie. She brought it on the first Friday of June, in the morning before the diner opened. Apple, from a recipe in a 1987 spiral-bound local cookbook she'd found at the Calder post office for 50 cents. Because apple seemed right. She left it on the counter when Dell came in, and Dell looked at it and then at Wren and understood exactly, without being told, what it meant. "Every first Friday?" Dell said. "Every first Friday," Wren said. Dell made coffee, and they ate a piece each at the counter in the quiet of the diner before the day had properly started, and Dell told Wren more about August, the way he'd always ordered black coffee and whatever was freshest, the day he'd come in looking unlike himself, and told Dell's mother that Western Union had officially ended telegram service, and he'd been the one to send the last message in. Calder and he'd wanted to tell someone, because a thing like that deserved to be told to someone. Dell's mother had made him sit down and brought him soup, and he'd sat there for a while and then said, "Well," and finished the soup and gone back to work. It was July when her father called. She was in the wire room measuring for a shelf above the operator's key. She looked at the phone and answered it because not answering was a choice she'd stopped making. Gene Aldous said he'd heard she'd bought a building. She said yes. He said he'd heard something had been found inside. She said yes. He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who has prepared something to say, and the conversation has moved past where it fits. "That's something," he said. "It is," she said. "You doing all right out there?" "I'm doing well. Better than I expected." She heard him shift the phone. She could picture him in the kitchen in Millhaven, the same chair at the corner of the table. "You always were," he started, then stopped. She waited. "I should have done more," he said. Not elaborated, not explained. Just placed the sentence there, in the space between them, and left it. She looked at the operator's key on the workbench, at the worn place on the lever where the thumb and 2 fingers had rested for 11 years. "I know, Dad," she said. Not as absolution, not as dismissal. As a true thing, placed clearly, the way August Morse had placed his words when transmitting something across a distance to someone he couldn't see. She sat in the wire room for a while after she hung up. The building was quiet around her in the way it had become quiet to her over the months, a specific quiet she had learned the character of, the particular hush of old wood and original glass, and a floor that had been walked on for 130 years. She had come here with $10 in a jacket pocket and no clear claim to anything, and now she was sitting at the workbench where August Morse had come every morning for 18 years and written down everything he knew. And the key that had sent the last telegram in Calder was in front of her in its wooden box, and the manuscript was at the university, and Patricia Yee had found 2 publishers who wanted to read it, and on the first Friday of every month, there was pie. She pressed the lever once, gently, the way she had on the first day. It clicked with the same clean precision. She held her thumb on it for a moment, the brass cool and smooth, the butternut warm, the spring resistance of the mechanism exactly calibrated to the pressure of a practiced hand. She had never learned Morse code. She thought, sitting in the wire room in the Calder evening, that she might. She was 20 years old, and she was broke in the way that has a specific texture to it. That was where the story had started, in the inside pocket of a denim jacket, in a number in a checking account that was already the number she'd known it would be. But that was not what the story was. The story was about what you find when you keep showing up to a thing past the point where showing up is easy, what is waiting, patient and deliberate and placed with care, for the person who comes next and needs it. It was about the operator, silent in his wire room for 18 years, who had understood that some messages are meant to travel slowly, across the kind of distance that cannot be measured in miles. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think of someone who worked quietly for a long time in a way most people didn't see, or a moment when something was waiting for you that you hadn't known to look for, we'd love it if you'd subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And in the comments, tell us this: is there something you've been building quietly? Something most people around you don't know about yet? We'd love to hear it. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.